Emma Chen pressed her face against the cold window of her father's Honda Accord, watching the pine trees blur past as they descended into Millbrook, Colorado. The mountains loomed overhead like sleeping giants, their peaks dusted with early October. Snow that caught the afternoon sunlight. 3 weeks into her junior year at Riverside High School, and she still felt like a stranger observing life through glass. The small mountain town of 15,000 people moved at a different rhythm than Seattle, where conversations happened in coffee shops instead of pickup truck beds. And nobody knew your business unless you chose to share it. The transition had been jarring in ways her parents hadn't anticipated when they'd packed up their lives and driven east. David Chen had sold the relocation to his daughter as a fresh start, a chance to experience small-town America before college. What he hadn't mentioned were the late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, or the way his jaw tightened whenever news reports mentioned international incidents. Linda Chen had embraced her new role at Millbrook General Hospital with the enthusiasm of someone grateful for normalcy. But Emma caught her mother checking locks twice before bed and positioning herself, with clear sightlines to exits wherever they went. Emma understood the unspoken rules of their new life. Blend in, don't attract attention, be forgettable. It was a cruel irony, considering everything her parents had taught her over the years made her anything but ordinary. While other kids her age had spent summers at camp learning friendship bracelets and campfire songs, Emma had been learning to read body language, memorize exit routes, and move through spaces without making sound. The basement of their Mountain View Apartments unit had been converted into something that looked like a home gym to casual observers. But Emma knew the difference between civilian fitness equipment and professional training apparatus. At Riverside High, Emma had carved out a careful existence in the spaces between social groups. She wasn't popular enough to be noticed by the elite crowd, wasn't troubled enough for the rebels, wasn't academic enough for the honor roll students who spent lunch in the library. She ate alone most days, usually near the large windows that offered clear views of all entrances to the cafeteria. Old habits, her father would say. Good habits, her mother would correct. The art classroom had become her refuge during free periods. Mrs. Rodriguez, the art teacher, never asked questions about why Emma preferred to sit with her back to the wall or why she always chose seats near the door. Emma had discovered she had a talent for observational sketching, filling notebooks with detailed drawings of her classmates, teachers, and the mountain landscapes visible through the school windows. Drawing gave her a legitimate reason to watch, people to study their movements and expressions without seeming intrusive. But even careful invisibility had its limits. Emma was learning that some people specialized in noticing those who didn't want to be seen. Madison Wells had ruled Riverside High's social hierarchy since middle school. Her authority built on a foundation of family money, natural charisma, and an intuitive understanding of teenage power dynamics. Her father owned the largest construction company in 3 counties, and her mother sat on every community board that mattered. Madison moved through the hallways with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Surrounded by a carefully curated group of followers who amplified her influence. Tyler Brooks served as Madison's enforcer, his Letterman jacket and scholarship offers providing physical intimidation when social pressure wasn't sufficient. At 6'2", with the broad shoulders of a linebacker and hands that could crush aluminum cans without effort, Tyler had learned early that his size could solve problems his intellect couldn't handle. He wore his aggressive reputation like armor, and teachers looked the other way when his jokes crossed lines because his football statistics kept Riverside High competitive in their division. Sophia Martinez occupied the role of Madison's shadow, always present, but rarely speaking unless asked direct questions. Her family had moved to Millbrook when she was in 8th grade. She'd learned that proximity to power was safer than independence. Sophia's survival strategy involved anticipating Madison's needs and validating her decisions, trading her autonomy for protection from the social exile that awaited those who challenged the established order. Emma had managed to avoid their attention for almost a month, but invisibility required constant vigilance. And high school social dynamics had their own gravitational pull that eventually drew outliers into established orbits. The trouble began on a Thursday afternoon in late October, when Emma made the mistake of excelling at something Madison considered her domain. The art class had been working on portrait assignments. Mrs. Rodriguez had displayed the completed works around the room for peer evaluation. Emma's charcoal drawing of the mountain range visible from the classroom window had captured not just the physical details of the landscape, but something deeper about the way afternoon light transformed familiar shapes into something almost magical. Madison's watercolor of the same view looked exactly like what it was. Technically competent, but emotionally vacant. The work of someone who had received expensive private lessons, but had never learned to see beyond surface appearances. When Mrs. Rodriguez praised Emma's piece as demonstrating exceptional observational skills and emotional depth, Madison's smile had turned brittle around the edges. The first confrontation happened 2 days later in the hallway between second and third period. Emma was navigating the crowd of students changing classes when Madison materialized beside her locker, flanked by Tyler and Sophia. The positioning was strategic, blocking Emma's escape routes while appearing casual to passing teachers. Tyler's shoulder check sent Emma's books cascading across the polished floor, papers scattering like autumn leaves. "Sorry about that," he said, his tone suggesting anything but apology. "Didn't see you there? Maybe you should make yourself more visible?" His Letterman jacket made him look even more imposing against Emma's smaller frame, and his grin held the kind of cruelty that came from knowing there would be no consequences.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Madison's laugh carried just far enough to attract attention from nearby students. "Oh, Tyler, you're terrible. She can't help being practically invisible. It's not her fault she's so forgettable." Her voice held the kind of false sympathy that cut deeper than open hostility, designed to wound while maintaining plausible deniability. Emma knelt to gather her scattered belongings, her movements controlled and deliberate. She could feel the weight of watching eyes, phones potentially recording, teachers who would arrive just late enough to miss the instigation. The hallway buzzed with the energy of potential drama, students slowing their pace to observe the interaction between Millbrook's Queen Bee and the quiet new girl. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. As Emma collected the last of her papers, she caught sight of her own hands, steady despite everything. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from countless training sessions. Control your breathing, control your environment, control the narrative. She straightened slowly, shouldering her backpack with practiced efficiency. Madison, Tyler, and Sophia watched her with the predatory patience of hunters who knew they had cornered their prey. What none of them realized was that Emma Chen had been trained by professionals who understood that the most dangerous predators were often the ones that looked like prey. Emma's routine at Riverside High had developed into a careful choreography of avoidance and observation. She arrived 15 minutes before first bell. The hallways still echoed with emptiness and custodial staff pushed wide mops across floors that gleamed under fluorescent lights. Her locker, number 247, sat strategically positioned near the main office where administrative presence deterred most confrontations. She'd memorized the schedules of teachers who stayed late, the blind spots in hallway surveillance, and the patterns of student movement that could provide cover when needed. The Chen family's evening dinners had taken on a ritualistic quality. Since their arrival in Millbrook, David would ask about her classes with the kind of detailed interest that seemed parental but carried undertones of professional debriefing. Linda would share stories from the hospital that highlighted community dynamics and local personalities. Emma had learned to recognize these conversations as intelligence gathering disguised as family bonding, each member contributing observations that helped build their comprehensive understanding of their new environment. David Chen's transformation into a suburban insurance salesman had been meticulously crafted. His home office contained actuarial tables, policy documents, and client files that would satisfy any casual inspection. His business cards listed a Denver company that existed on paper and in cyberspace, complete with a functional phone number that forwarded to a secure line. When neighbors asked about his work, David could discuss premium calculations and risk assessments with the fluency of someone who had studied the role extensively. What they couldn't see were the encrypted communications he received through seemingly innocent insurance industry newsletters, the way his fingers automatically checked for concealed weapons whenever strangers approached too closely. Position at Millbrook General had provided the family with legitimate community connections and insight into local hierarchies. The hospital employed relatives of half the town's prominent families, and medical professionals heard everything eventually. Through careful listening and strategic conversations, Linda had mapped the social landscape that Emma would navigate at school. The Wells family's influence extended beyond construction contracts into school board decisions and municipal politics. Tyler Brooks came from a family where athletic achievement had provided upward mobility for 3 generations. The Martinez family had fled economic instability in California, making them relative newcomers despite their 4-year residence. The basement training facility represented the most dangerous aspect of their cover story. To building inspectors or curious neighbors, it appeared to be an elaborate home gym installed by health-conscious transplants from the city. The punching bags, weight equipment, and yoga mats suggested expensive suburban wellness culture rather than professional combat preparation. Hidden behind false panels and disguised within innocuous storage containers were weapons, surveillance equipment, and communication devices that would have impressed federal law enforcement agencies. Emma's training had evolved throughout her childhood from basic self-defense into comprehensive tactical education. David had introduced concepts gradually, framing lessons as games or family activities. Learning to move silently through the house became a nighttime adventure. Memorizing facial features and behavioral patterns became a restaurant entertainment. Identifying potential weapons in everyday environments became a shopping trip challenge. By age 12, Emma could field strip and reassemble 3 different handgun models blindfolded. By 14, she could disable an adult opponent using pressure points and leverage techniques that turned physical disadvantages into strategic advantages. The psychological aspects of her education had been equally thorough. Linda had taught Emma to read microexpressions, recognize deception patterns, and manipulate social dynamics through careful observation and strategic responses. Emma learned to project whatever personality would be most effective in specific situations, to become forgettable when invisibility served her purposes, or memorable when she needed to control narratives. These skills had served her well in Seattle, where urban anonymity made blending in relatively simple. Millbrook presented different challenges. Small-town dynamics meant that everyone eventually noticed everyone else. Sustained invisibility required more sophisticated techniques. Emma had to become interesting enough to avoid suspicion about her reclusiveness, but not so distinctive that people remembered her interactions in detail. She volunteered for cleanup duties that kept her busy during social periods. She joined the photography club, which provided legitimate reasons to observe people through camera lenses. She cultivated a reputation for being helpful but unobtrusive, the kind of person teachers appreciated but rarely thought about outside of classroom contexts. The art classroom had become more than a refuge. It had become her observation post. From her preferred seat near the windows, Emma could monitor the student parking lot, the main entrance, and the administrative wing. Her sketching provided cover for surveillance activities that would have seemed suspicious otherwise. She documented behavioral patterns, social interactions, and relationship dynamics through seemingly innocent drawings that actually served as intelligence reports. Mrs. Rodriguez had noticed Emma's exceptional observational skills, but interpreted them as artistic talent rather than professional training. The art teacher had begun assigning Emma additional projects that challenged her technical abilities, while unknowingly expanding her surveillance opportunities. Portrait assignments required Emma to study facial structures and expressions with the kind of intensity that revealed personality traits and emotional states. Landscape drawings taught her to notice environmental details that could provide tactical advantages or reveal hidden dangers. Madison Wells had entered Emma's awareness during the second week of school, not because of any direct interaction, but because of the social gravitational field she generated. Students altered their behavior when Madison approached. Conversations shifted in tone and content, and even teachers modulated their authority differently in her presence. Emma had cataloged these dynamics with professional interest, recognizing Madison as the kind of individual who could either facilitate integration or create significant problems depending on how their paths intersected. Tyler Brooks represented a more straightforward challenge. His physical presence and aggressive tendencies made him predictable in ways that simplified tactical planning. Emma had observed his interactions with smaller students, noting that his intimidation techniques relied heavily on size advantage and social positioning rather than actual combat skills. His movements lacked the fluid efficiency of trained fighters, and his anger made him telegraphic in ways that created exploitable openings. Sofia Martinez presented the most complex psychological profile. Her survival strategy of submission and validation suggested intelligence constrained by fear and social insecurity. Emma recognized in Sofia someone who had learned to navigate hostile environments through careful observation and strategic positioning, skills that could make her either a valuable ally or a dangerous informant, depending on how loyalties shifted. During conflicts, the family's cover story required constant maintenance and careful coordination. David's insurance work provided plausible explanations for irregular schedules and out-of-town trips that were actually mission-related activities. Linda's hospital shifts offered cover for meetings and communications that couldn't happen at home. Emma's school performance had to be good enough to avoid unwanted attention from counselors or administrators, but not so exceptional that she attracted scholarship offers or academic competitions that would require background verification. Their Mountain View Apartments unit had been chosen for tactical advantages disguised as suburban conveniences. The third-floor location provided clear sightlines in multiple directions, while limiting approach vectors for potential threats. The building's layout offered multiple exit routes, and the parking arrangement allowed for quick vehicle departures. If situations deteriorated rapidly, their neighbors included a retired postal worker who maintained predictable routines, a young couple who traveled frequently for work, and a single mother whose nursing schedule at the hospital overlapped with Linda's shifts. Emma's social isolation at Riverside High hadn't been entirely strategic. Despite her training and preparation, she sometimes felt the genuine loneliness that came from maintaining constant vigilance and emotional distance. There were moments during lunch periods when she watched other students laughing together and wondered what normal teenage friendships might feel like. But those moments of vulnerability were quickly suppressed by the knowledge that her family's safety depended on their ability to maintain their carefully constructed false identities. The encounter with Madison, Tyler, and Sofia had marked a significant shift in the school's social dynamics. Emma's presence had been noted by the power structure, and neutrality was no longer a sustainable position. The next phase of her Riverside High experience would require more active management of her reputation and relationships. Decisions that could either secure their cover or expose their true circumstances to dangerous scrutiny. The basement of the Chen family's Mountain View Apartments unit transformed every evening at precisely 7:30, when David would descend the stairs carrying what appeared to be a standard gym bag but contained equipment that would have raised eyebrows at any civilian fitness center. The space itself had been carefully designed to pass casual inspection while serving purposes that went far beyond suburban wellness routines. Sound dampening materials had been installed behind decorative wall panels, creating an environment where conversations could happen without reaching neighboring units or the floors above. Emma's education had begun when she was 8 years old, shortly after her parents had explained that their family was different from others in ways that required special preparation for an uncertain world. David had introduced the concept through stories about ancient warriors who protected their communities by developing exceptional skills, making the training feel like participation in historical traditions rather than preparation for modern dangers. The lessons had progressed gradually from basic physical conditioning to sophisticated combat techniques, building upon previous knowledge until Emma possessed capabilities that would have impressed military special operations units. The weapons training had been the most carefully managed aspect of her education. David had started with improvised weapons, teaching Emma to recognize the tactical potential in everyday objects before introducing her to purpose-built tools. A rolled-up magazine could become a striking implement, a pen could serve as a pressure point tool, and a simple belt could function as both restraint and weapon depending on circumstances. kitchen utensils, gardening tools, and office supplies all possessed. Secondary applications that most people never considered but that could provide decisive advantages during confrontations. Linda's contributions to Emma's education had focused on psychological warfare and information-gathering techniques that complemented the physical skills David provided. Emma learned to read vocal stress patterns that revealed deception, to recognize behavioral tells that indicated hostile intentions, and to manipulate social dynamics through carefully calibrated responses. These skills proved equally valuable in civilian environments, where understanding human psychology could prevent conflicts before they escalated to physical confrontations. The family's true history stretched back through decades of government service that had taken them to locations most people knew only through news reports and adventure films. David's official record showed 22 years with various federal agencies, but the classified portions of his file contained operations in countries that didn't appear on standard maps and situations that required THS solutions outside conventional diplomatic channels. His expertise in languages, cultural adaptation, and urban warfare had made him valuable for assignments where American interests needed protection without official acknowledgement. Linda's background in intelligence analysis had provided the family with skills that proved invaluable during their transition to civilian life. Her ability to process information patterns and recognize potential threats had kept them safe during the vulnerable period when former adversaries might have sought revenge for David's previous operations. The decision to relocate to Millbrook had been based on extensive research into communities that offered the right combination of isolation, surveillance limitations, and escape route options. Emma's own capabilities had been tested in controlled environments that simulated real-world scenarios without exposing her to actual danger. David had arranged training exercises with trusted colleagues who could provide realistic opposition while maintaining safety protocols. Emma had learned to neutralize multiple opponents using techniques that relied on speed, precision, and psychological impact rather than sustained physical confrontation. Her small stature and unassuming appearance provided tactical advantages that larger, more obviously dangerous individuals couldn't access. The art of blending into civilian populations had required different skills than those needed for tactical operations. Emma had studied normal teenage behavior patterns with the same intensity she'd applied to combat training, learning to mimic social interactions and emotional responses that would make her appear unremarkable to casual observers. She'd practiced expressing typical adolescent concerns about homework, friendships, future plans, while suppressing the hypervigilance and threat assessment habits that had become second nature. The family's communication protocols ensured that each member could contact the others instantly if situations deteriorated beyond manageable levels. Emma carried what appeared to be a standard smartphone but contained modified hardware that could transmit emergency signals through encrypted channels. Her school schedule had been shared with both parents, along with detailed maps of Riverside High that identified potential choke points, escape routes, and areas where help could arrive quickly if needed. David's insurance work provided legitimate cover for activities that kept his operational skills current while maintaining their suburban facade. His cases sometimes required travel to locations where he could practice surveillance techniques and maintain contacts within professional networks that might provide assistance if their situation changed. The income from his insurance sales was sufficient to support their lifestyle without requiring explanations about additional funding sources that might have raised uncomfortable questions. Linda's position at Millbrook General Hospital offered more than just community integration opportunities. Medical facilities maintained relationships with law enforcement agencies, emergency response teams, and government officials who might prove valuable allies if the family's true circumstances were ever discovered. Her access to hospital records and patient information also provided insight into local power structures and family dynamics that could influence Emma's experiences at school. The decision to allow Emma to attend public school had been controversial within the family, with legitimate arguments for homeschooling or private education that would have provided more control over her environment. But integration into normal teenage society was considered essential for her long-term psychological development and future opportunities. The compromise involved intensive preparation for scenarios that might require her to defend herself while maintaining their cover story. Emma's daily routine at Riverside High had been designed to minimize exposure to situations that might force her to reveal her capabilities prematurely. Her class schedule avoided high-stress activities like competitive sports or drama productions, where emotions might override careful self-control. Her extracurricular activities were chosen for their low profiles and opportunities. For useful skill development that appeared innocuous to outside observers, the basement training sessions had evolved to address the specific challenges of high school social dynamics. Emma practiced scenarios where she might need to defend herself against multiple opponents while ensuring that security cameras or student witnesses couldn't document her true capabilities. She learned to calibrate her responses to match the perceived threat level, while leaving room for escalation if initial deterrence proved insufficient. David had shared stories about his own experiences with maintaining cover identities during long-term assignments, emphasizing the psychological toll of constantly suppressing natural responses and genuine personality traits. The isolation that came from being unable to form authentic relationships could create emotional vulnerabilities that adversaries might exploit. Emma needed to find ways to satisfy her need for human connection without compromising the family's security or her own safety. Linda had taught Emma to recognize the signs of psychological stress that could interfere with operational effectiveness, including the depression and anxiety that often accompanied prolonged isolation from peer groups. The art classes and photography club participation were meant to provide creative outlets that could help maintain emotional stability, while serving practical purposes for their ongoing mission to establish sustainable civilian lives. The weapons, cache hidden within the basement training facility, represented insurance against scenarios where their cover story might be compromised and they needed to defend themselves or escape quickly. Emma had been trained on every item in their inventory, from conventional firearms to specialized equipment designed for close-quarters combat and emergency communications. She knew the location of additional supplies positioned throughout their apartment and could access them quickly, even in low-light conditions. The family's long-term planning included contingencies for Emma's transition to college and eventual independence from their protection. Scenarios that would require her to maintain operational security while building the kind of normal adult life that their sacrifices were meant to make possible. These conversations happened during their evening training sessions, when the soundproofed basement allowed them to discuss future possibilities without concern about surveillance or accidental disclosure to neighbors who might become suspicious about their true circumstances. The cafeteria at Riverside High operated according to unwritten laws that governed everything from seating arrangements to conversation topics, invisible boundaries that separated social groups as effectively as physical barriers. Emma had spent her first weeks mapping these territories with the systematic attention of a military strategist studying enemy positions. The popular students claimed tables near the large windows that offered natural lighting for social media photography. Athletes congregated around the vending machines where their size and energy created natural gathering spaces. Academic achievers occupied corners where they could spread textbooks and maintain focused discussions about upcoming assignments. Emma's chosen position at a small table near the kitchen service doors provided multiple advantages that appeared coincidental to casual observers. The constant movement of cafeteria staff created visual noise that made surveillance more difficult while offering legitimate reasons for her to remain alert and observant. The proximity to emergency exits satisfied her tactical requirements without seeming paranoid or antisocial. Most importantly, the location was undesirable enough that other students avoided it, allowing her to maintain the social isolation that protected their family's cover story. The confrontation began when Madison Wells deviated from her usual lunch routine, abandoning her customary tables surrounded by admirers to approach Emma's deliberately inconspicuous corner. Tyler and Sophia flanked her in a formation that seemed casual but effectively blocked escape routes while ensuring that their interaction would attract attention from surrounding tables. Madison's smile carried the predatory brightness of someone who had identified vulnerability and intended to exploit it for entertainment. "Well, hello there," Madison said, her voice pitched perfectly to carry two nearby tables without seeming deliberately loud. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. You're the new girl, right, Emma? Isn't it?" The question was rhetorical, delivered with the kind of false friendliness that preceded social execution. Madison's positioning suggested someone who had planned this encounter carefully, choosing a time when the cafeteria was crowded enough to provide an audience, but not so busy that teachers would notice potential problems. Emma looked up from her lunch, homemade sandwich that Linda had prepared using ingredients that wouldn't require refrigeration or heating. Part of the family's ongoing emphasis on self-sufficiency and preparedness. "Yes, I'm Emma Chen," she replied, keeping her voice neutral and her posture relaxed, despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. The situation was developing along predictable lines, but Emma had learned that even anticipated conflicts required careful management to avoid escalation beyond controllable parameters. Tyler stepped closer, using his physical presence to create implicit intimidation while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. "So Emma," he said, pronouncing her name with exaggerated precision, "what brings your family to our little mountain paradise?" His tone suggested that he already knew the answer and found it amusing. The kind of loaded question designed to force responses that could be used against the target regardless of how they were answered. "My father got transferred for work," Emma said, sticking to the cover story that had been carefully crafted to withstand casual scrutiny while discouraging deeper investigation. "Insurance adjusting. The mountains are beautiful, and the schools have good reputations." The response was bland enough to be believable while containing just enough detail to suggest honesty without inviting follow-up questions that might probe areas where their fabricated history could unravel. Sophia giggled in a way that seemed spontaneous but had the timing of someone following a predetermined script. "Insurance? That's so random. I mean, who moves to Colorado to sell insurance?" Her contribution to the conversation served to amplify Madison's authority while providing plausible cover for the hostility that was becoming increasingly apparent. The question was designed to make Emma's family's presence seem suspicious or worthy of ridicule. Madison leaned forward, placing her hands on Emma's table in a gesture that seemed friendly, but actually invaded personal space and established dominance through physical positioning. "The thing is, Emma," she said, her voice dropping to a more intimate register that forced nearby students to lean in to hear her words, "We're all just curious about you. You keep to yourself so much, never really talk to anyone, always sitting alone. It makes people wonder what you're hiding." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, designed to plant seeds of suspicion while appearing to express genuine concern about Emma's social adjustment. Madison had identified the weakness in Emma's approach to integration. The way her necessary isolation could be interpreted as evidence of secretiveness or superiority that threatened the established social order. The observation was accurate enough to be dangerous while being delivered in a way that invited others to share similar concerns. Emma felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down that accompanied high-stress situations, her training automatically engaging protocols for threat assessment and response planning. The cafeteria continued its normal operations around their table, but Emma's awareness narrowed to focus on the immediate tactical situation. Madison's body language suggested confidence born of social privilege and past successes in similar confrontations. Tyler's positioning indicated someone prepared to provide physical intimidation if psychological pressure proved insufficient. Sophia's nervous energy revealed someone who wanted to be elsewhere, but lacked the courage to extract herself from the situation. "I'm not hiding anything," Emma said, her voice remaining steady despite the increased tension. "I'm just focused on my studies and getting settled in a new place. It takes time to make friends, especially when you're starting somewhere new in the middle of the school year." The response acknowledged their concerns while deflecting suspicion, a technique Linda had taught her for managing hostile interrogations without revealing sensitive information. Madison's smile widened, but the expression didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold and calculating as she evaluated Emma's response for weaknesses that could be exploited further. "Oh, but that's just it," she said, straightening up and gesturing to include the surrounding tables in her audience. "You've been here for weeks now, and you still act like you're better than everyone else. Always watching people like you're judging them, never participating in anything fun, treating everyone like they're beneath you. The accusation was more sophisticated than Emma had anticipated. Turning her operational awareness and cautious behavior into evidence of arrogance and social contempt, Madison had successfully reframed Emma's survival strategies as character flaws that justified whatever consequences might follow. The technique demonstrated political instincts that made Madison more dangerous than simple bullies, who relied on intimidation and physical advantage. Tyler crossed his arms, his Letterman jacket stretching across his broad chest as he adopted a pose that emphasized his size. Advantage while appearing relaxed and confident. "Yeah, it's like you think you're too good for Millbrook," he added, his voice carrying the resentment of someone who had never left their hometown and viewed outsiders as implicit criticism of their lifestyle choices. "Maybe you miss the big city. Too much to appreciate what we have here?" The conversation had attracted attention from surrounding tables, with students pausing their own discussions to observe the developing conflict. Emma could see phones being positioned discreetly to capture potential drama, social media instincts overriding any concerns about the welfare of those involved. The audience factor changed the dynamics significantly, creating pressure for escalation, while limiting options for de-escalation that might seem like weakness or defeat. Sophia stepped closer, emboldened by the support of her companions and the attention from their growing audience. "We're just trying to help you fit in," she said, her voice carrying false concern that barely masked the excitement of participating in something that would enhance her own social status through association with Madison's power. "Maybe if you tried harder to be friendly, people would like you more." Emma recognized the classic pattern of coordinated social attack, with each participant playing a specific role designed to isolate the target while providing mutual support for increasingly aggressive behavior. The technique was effective because it appeared to come from multiple independent sources rather than a single hostile individual, creating the impression of widespread community concern rather than targeted harassment. "I appreciate your concern," Emma said, beginning to pack her lunch items back into her bag with movements that appeared casual but actually prepared her for rapid departure. "If the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation, I'll try to be more social. Maybe we could start with getting to know each other better sometime when there's more privacy for conversation." Madison's laugh was sharp and theatrical, designed to signal dismissal and establish that Emma's attempt at diplomatic resolution had been rejected. "Oh, sweetie," she said, the endearment dripping with condescension. "I don't think you understand how things work here. This is your chance to show everyone what kind of person you really are." The moment crystallized around them as Madison reached into her designer purse and withdrew something that made Emma's blood run cold. The scissors gleamed under the fluorescent cafeteria lights, their silver blades catching reflections that scattered across nearby tables like warning signals. Madison held them casually, as if they were simply another accessory. But Emma's trained eye immediately cataloged them as a weapon with approximately 4-inch blades, sharp enough to cause serious damage, being wielded by someone who's emotional. State had shifted from calculated cruelty to genuine malice. "You know what I think your problem is?" Madison said, her voice taking on a sing-song quality that made the surrounding students lean forward with anticipation. "I think you're hiding behind all that boring hair. Maybe if we gave you a more honest look, people could see the real you." She opened and closed the scissors experimentally. It's a metallic snicking sound cutting through the ambient cafeteria noise like a blade through silk. Tyler's grin widened as he realized what Madison intended, his hands flexing unconsciously, as he prepared to restrain Emma if she tried to resist. "Oh, this is going to be good," he said, his voice thick with anticipation. "Hold still, new girl. Madison's really good with scissors. She cuts her own hair all the time." The lie was obvious, but served to provide justification for what everyone knew was about to become assault with a weapon. Sophia pulled out her phone, angling it to capture the best view of Emma's face as Madison approached with the scissors raised. "This is going to get so many views," she whispered, not caring that her words carried clearly to nearby tables. "Everyone's going to want to see what happens to stuck-up girls who think they're better than everyone else." Emma felt the familiar calm descend over her mind as her training engaged automatically. Time seemed to stretch and slow, allowing her to process multiple variables simultaneously, while her body prepared for action. Madison was approaching from the front, scissors in her dominant right hand, her stance unbalanced because she was performing for the cameras rather than executing an efficient attack. Tyler was positioned to Emma's left, close enough to grab her, but not an optimal position to prevent her movement. Sophia remained focused on her phone screen, prioritizing documentation over situational awareness. The cafeteria had fallen silent, except for the sound of phones recording and the shuffle of feet as students positioned themselves for better views. Teachers were nowhere to be seen, probably in the faculty lounge or dealing with administrative duties that kept them away from student areas during lunch periods. Emma was completely alone, surrounded by an audience that wanted to see her humiliated, with no adult intervention forthcoming. "Just hold still, and it'll be over quick," Madison said, reaching for Emma's hair with her free hand while positioning the scissors for the first cut. "Think of it as a public service, or helping you become more honest about who you really are." Emma's response was so fast that most observers didn't see the transition from victim to predator. Her left hand shot up and caught Madison's wrist in a grip that stopped the scissors inches from her hair, her fingers finding pressure points with surgical precision. Madison's confident expression turned to shock as pain shot up her arm, and her hand opened involuntarily, sending the scissors clattering to the floor. Before Tyler could react, Emma was moving. Her right elbow drove back into his solar plexus with enough force to double him over, while her left foot swept his legs out from under him. He crashed to the floor with a sound that echoed through the silent cafeteria, his Letterman jacket doing nothing to cushion his impact with the unforgiving linoleum. Sophia screamed and stumbled backward, her phone flying from her hands as Emma spun toward her with fluid grace. But Emma didn't strike. Instead, she simply caught the phone before it could hit the ground and crushed it between her fingers as if it were made of paper rather than metal and glass. "Oops," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Accidents happen. Madison was cradling her wrist, tears streaming down her face as she stared at Emma with newfound understanding. The confident Queen Bee had vanished, replaced by a frightened teenager who had just discovered that the world contained predators far more dangerous than high school social hierarchies. Emma looked around the cafeteria at the sea of shocked faces, phones still recording but now capturing something very different than what their owners had expected. When she spoke, her voice was calm and conversational, but it carried an authority that made everyone lean in to hear her words. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, addressing the room rather than her former tormentors. "Madison, Tyler, and Sophia are going to leave me alone from now on. They're going to leave everyone else alone too, because they've learned something important today about making assumptions about people they don't really know." She knelt down beside Tyler, who was still gasping for breath on the floor. "You'd like to use your size to intimidate people smaller than you," she said conversationally. "But size doesn't matter when someone knows what they're doing. Remember that the next time you think about pushing someone around." Emma stood and walked over to where Madison was still holding her wrist. "And you," she said, her voice gentle but carrying undertones that made Madison flinch. "You like to hurt people because it makes you feel powerful. But real power doesn't come from making others feel small. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of." She picked up her backpack and slung it over her shoulder, then looked around the cafeteria one more time. "My name is Emma Chen," she said clearly. "I'm not hiding from anyone or anything. I'm exactly who I appear to be. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize what that means." Emma walked toward the cafeteria exit, her footsteps the only sound in the massive room. Behind her, students slowly began to whisper and move, but the normal energy of lunch period had been permanently altered. Madison, Tyler, and Sophia remained where Emma had left them, processing the reality that their carefully constructed social order had just been demolished by someone they had dismissed as an easy target. As Emma pushed through the doors into the hallway, she felt a strange sense of relief. The careful invisibility was over, the pretense of weakness abandoned. She was still Emma Chen, insurance salesman's daughter, but now everyone at Riverside Hai knew that there were depths to that identity that they had never suspected. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Heard there was some excitement at school? Everything under control? Emma smiled and typed back. Situation resolved. No permanent damage. Cover story intact. The response came immediately. Proud. Of you. See you at home. Emma slipped the phone back into her pocket and headed to her next class. Behind her, the cafeteria was probably still buzzing with speculation and recording videos that would be shared throughout the school before the final bell rang. No, but that was fine. Sometimes the best way to maintain a cover story was to reveal just enough truth to satisfy curiosity while keeping the most important secrets safely hidden. The hallways of Riverside High looked different now, brighter somehow, and full of possibility. Emma Chen walked through them with quiet confidence. Knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of, the janitor's daughter in the original story had found her strength through family support and hidden training. Emma had found hers through accepting that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was underestimate someone who looked harmless. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.